Yeah, I'm Keith McHenry, and I'm one of the co-founders of Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs started in 1980, and basically we were 8 anti-nuclear activists. One of my professors was Howard Zinn. He was my history teacher, and he would talk about the protests against Seabrook Nuclear Power Station. So I started going up to those, and one of my friends, Brian, who was a law student at BU, he got arrested, and we were starting doing bake sales to raise money for his legal fund. We didn't really make much money, but then eventually we happened to I had a bunch of little part-time jobs. I was a produce worker, and had a moving company, and I moved this family, and they were throwing away a poster that said, "Wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber?" And so it was really a cool thing. So we decided that we would end up going out dressed as military people. We bought a bunch of uniforms from the Army Navy surplus store and started selling our baked goods on the streets with the posters saying, "Help us buy a bomber, help us buy a bomber." So that was one of the first actions. And then also, because I was a produce worker in the mornings, I was throwing out all this produce, and I started taking it to a housing project a couple of blocks away from the grocery stores. And we ended up turning out across the street from the housing project with these brand new glass buildings, and that's where they were designing the guidance system for nuclear missiles. And that kind of contributed to the idea of having the name Food Not Bombs, because you had this poverty on one side of this little road, and you had this massive glass buildings on the other side. And then the final thing that started Food Not Bombs was that we were approached by some activists in Clamshell Alliance, the group stopping Seabrook. They wanted us to make a brochure on how the board of directors of the Bank of Boston were on the board of the nuclear industry, and that they're basically lending themselves money without oversight. And we thought, wow, that's a lot like the bank policies that started the Great Depression. So we decided to take some of the produce I was delivering to the project and make a huge pot of soup, and we're going to dress up like hobos and go out onto the streets and say, look at the policies of the Bank of Boston could lead to an economic depression like the 30s, and that Americans will end up having to stand in line to eat food at soup kitchens. We have 3 principles of Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs always shares free vegan or vegetarian meals without restriction to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober. The second principle is that there's no leaders and no headquarters, no directors. Each Food Not Bombs chapter is autonomous and makes decisions using a process called consensus. And so that way we can bring in the people that are eating with us, with everybody else in the community to help make decisions, and that it's open to everybody. And then the third is that we're not a charity, but that we're dedicated to nonviolent social change and nonviolent resistance. And so those 3 principles are key. And what is fascinating is all the occupations share basically those 3 principles as well as for their organizing principles, that everything is free, they're not selling stuff, that the decisions are made at the General Assembly by consensus, and that we're dedicated to nonviolent social change. And so it's really beautiful that Food Not Bombs and the occupations are really sharing the same principles and the same methods of organizing, and that, of course, it's really helpful to have food at an occupation, and therefore Food Not Bombs is helping coordinate the food at all these different actions all over the country.
So how is Food Not Bombs involved in Occupy movement?
We received an email from Adbusters, and they emailed us about their proposal for Occupy Wall Street, so we started posting that on the Food Not Bombs website, and we started emailing all the Food Not Bombs chapters that you could participate in this and make flyers from the Adbusters website and stuff like that. And then, to our surprise, on September 17th, all these people showed up to Wall Street, and I had bought like all this rice. I'd raised $500 to buy a load of rice to bring east. Of course, as soon as the Wall Street action happened, all the Food Not Bombs kids started like saying, "Oh wow, we're going to support actions in our town." And other people started the occupations and then asked Food Not Bombs to bring the food. And so now we're providing food at least 100 occupations, maybe as many as 200. And so it kind of makes sense. You know, you need food to stay out on the streets for months and months, and so we're available to do that.